Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. CMC connects people and ideas through community conversations at forums just like this one each and every week. I'm Tony Bell, President and CEO of Phoenix Consulting Company, a full-service employee learning and development firm. I'm also proud to serve as a board member and a lifetime member of your Columbus CMC. We are so very grateful in this season of Thanksgiving, giving thanks, and this season of ending the year. We're just so grateful to today's sponsor, the Community Shelter Board. You can give a round of applause. Yeah, since they do such a great job with reminding us that there's no place like home and having a home. So yeah, I get it. You just want to give yourself a warm hug instead of a clap. It's fine. Do both. And thank you also to the presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, and to our promotional and live stream supporter, our partner, the Columbus Dispatch. Welcome, everyone. Give them a big round of applause. And thank you to the Ellis for hosting us. Every CMC forum takes a whole entire village. So let's thank everyone for today's program, for supporting and for you being here. All right. So Columbus saw nearly 24,000 eviction filings last year, a 12,000 case increase from the year before, which is still too many. Early 2024 data shows this trend is worsening, with evictions reaching a 20-year high here in Franklin County. And when you think about 20-year high, the population growing, it's not just percentages, it's numbers. And with every number, it's a person. So with a panel of regional leaders, each of them, today we unpack why evictions are climbing and the impact on communities when families lose their homes, and the strategies that advocates are leveraging to ensure more Central Ohio families stay housed. It's now my great honor to welcome our distinguished panelists. Please welcome Jean Edwards, Director of Legal Research and Magistrate with Franklin County Municipal Court. Big round of applause. And Shayla Favor, Columbus City Council member and the newly elected Franklin County Prosecutor. Congratulations, Councilmember Favor. Kate McGarvey, Executive Director of Legal Aid Southeast and Central Ohio. Our host, Danae King, is an Underserved Communities reporter with the Columbus Dispatch. Danae, sorry about that, I said Dana, and it is Danae. Danae King. We look forward to today's conversation, and Danae, come on up, the podium's yours.
Thanks so much, Tony. So I'm excited to get started today. Thanks to our panelists as well. So my first question is going to be for Jean. I know you see a lot of evictions, thousands, like Tony said, come through each year through eviction court. So tell me what you see as the reasons why people are getting evicted and losing their homes.
Sure, thanks so much. And on behalf of the Franklin County Municipal Court, I just want to thank the Columbus Metro Club for having me here. And it's a beautiful forum, beautiful space, and pleased to be here to talk about this very important topic impacting our community. Why do people end up in evictions court? Is that your question? It's everything you think it is. It's not being able to pay the bills. It's people who are, one hospital bill away is kind of the cliche, but it's true. You see all of that humanity in the evictions courtroom. They've had a death in the family that put them behind, and they had to financially cope with that, and that landed them in a tough spot that they couldn't kind of recover from. It's everything you think it is.
Yeah, so my next question is for both of you ladies. So we talk a lot in Columbus about affordable housing and just the lack we have of affordable housing and the need for it. So I recently reported that Columbus has a shortage of more than 52,000 rental units for people who are in need of affordable housing. So that means about a fourth of extremely low income families aren't able to get, only a fourth are able to get housing in the city. So I'm curious, how is eviction and our rising rates of eviction tied to this need and lack of affordable housing?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. So I think it needs to be said that, and I'm so grateful that we're having this conversation today, but evictions have not just started to go on the rise. This has been a trend that many housing advocates, housing providers have been navigating for quite some time. I'll specifically bring us back to pre-pandemic era, where Franklin County filed over 18,000 evictions, which at that time was still the largest number of evictions filed in the state of Ohio. We continue to still top those charts. But when we think about what a perfect storm looks like, you think about those, the pressures of what supply and demand looks like. We are going to continue to lose this battle if supply does not increase. And although there appears to be cranes everywhere, we are simply not unable to keep up with the pace of the growth of Columbus. Columbus is the 14th largest city in the country, and on the rise to being the 13th. We are the only growing city in the Midwest. And so there is, and relatively, we are still affordable, right? I hate to say that in some conversations, because I understand what many of our folks in our community are struggling with, trying to find housing. But when you think about what is happening on the West Coast in places like what we've been compared to, like in Austin, Columbus's market is still relatively affordable. And so that means that we're going to continue to see folks being attracted to Columbus. When you also think about what the pandemic did, although this problem has been one that we have been navigating for quite some time, it only exacerbated what was already happening on the ground. Given the rise in interest rates, you've got pressures on actual supply, and then just with the sheer demand of construction here in Columbus and with the rise of Intel. This is a perfect storm for us to see what is happening in the market. And so when we think about the hardest of those to serve, those 54,000 folks, and I believe it's probably more than that in our community, permanent supportive housing and deeply affordable housing is some of the hardest housing to construct and develop in our community. The reality is that there's no difference in building market rate and building what is designated as affordable in our community. A subsidy has to be included in order to bring those affordable home rates down. And so if we are unable as a municipality to get funds to support affordable housing through LIHTC funding and other federal sources, we're going to continue to see these pressures exacerbate in our community.
Member Favor. I think you hit on a lot of the key points. The only things that I would add is certainly, it is a landlord's market. And so the demand is high. And so what we have seen are vastly increasing rents, increasing around 37% since 2015, and tenants are struggling to keep up with that. So they're paying more and more of their rent towards housing, which is increasingly unaffordable. I think the other thing that bears mentioning is our housing stock is old, and a lot of it is in disrepair. And so that is meaning that folks are either not able to live in the existing units or living in places that are not habitable and not safe. And so the combination of landlords and property managers not keeping up those places is contributing to the housing crisis, in addition to the lack of affordable units. And for very low income individuals, we also know that the wait list for vouchers is double the number of vouchers that we have. And so across the board, whether you're towards the upper end or the lower end of poverty, it is a perfect storm in terms of housing.
Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about eviction court. It's really heartbreaking to see the families and individuals who go through this legal process. They're up there in front of a magistrate talking about losing their home. And so I want to talk about what the long-term impact, we might see these numbers of evictions, but what does this mean for the individuals and families who are actually being evicted and turned away from their home?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to start with that one. We have the Tenant Advocacy Project down at Eviction Court every day, as Magistrate Edwards knows well. And so we have attorneys down at court every day who are representing individuals with evictions, and represented about 1,700 households last year through evictions. And so what we see is, in terms of the impact on individuals, it's really destabilizing. And so it's not just that you lose your house, it's that you no longer live in the neighborhood. And so you may not have access to your child care. Your child no longer has access to their school. You may be further away from your job or not have the same transportation to your job. You have an eviction on your record, and 1 in 10 tenants in Franklin County has an eviction on their record, which, if we're already talking about having difficulty accessing housing, an eviction makes it almost impossible that a landlord is going to rent to you. And so long-term instability really follows from a lot of those evictions. So the more that we can stop someone from getting an eviction, build, whether it's to stop the eviction itself or to give time for someone to have a soft transition to another place, the better for both that individual and for the community as a whole.
And I am incredibly grateful for the partnership with the Legal Aid Society and helping us combat the true impact of evictions in our community, because it cannot go understated. We're floating a number out there of 24,000. That does not mean that 24,000 set-outs have actually occurred. So what it is signifying to us, and I believe it's a fraction of that number of folks that have actually been set out, that means, in my opinion, that what we are doing right now is working. That means emergency rental assistance dollars. The City of Columbus has put over $80 million out in rental assistance over the last 3 to 4 years alone. Partnering with the Legal Aid Society and making sure that those folks who income qualify and are in need of legal representation have that in eviction court. City Council commissioned a study by a group to figure out what it would cost the City of Columbus as well as Franklin County to make access to an attorney if you were facing an eviction in our community. Everybody knows in criminal world that you have the right, the legal right to an attorney, but that does not exist in this category. And so what would it look like for us to be able to stand up something countywide, knowing that the evidence is there, that it is absolutely working in combination with all of the other tools that are in the toolbox to stand up a program that would continue to support our residents as we navigate this terrain of supply and demand in our community. And what the study showed, that for every $1 that the city and Franklin County contributed to this program, we would see a $4 return in economic benefit. That means that when we're talking about housing instability, we are also talking about the cost of social services that comes along with those who are battling evictions, whether we are talking about health care or providing food service or providing emergency housing overnight in a hotel. These are actual costs that the city and municipalities bear. Those sources could be used in other ways to support our residents in Columbus. And so I think that it is something that we're going to continue to explore about what it would look like in our community to support this countywide.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in to follow that, I can't agree more. And, our services wouldn't be possible without the help of the city and the county and the Columbus Foundation and United Way and lots of others, and also the court. 8 years ago, the court looked very different, and I do think it's been successful. And there are now services down there for individuals, whether it's legal services or whether it's rental assistance, job and family services. The court has made changes to adjust the docket. So, we are on a path to help individuals who are being evicted and have had a big impact on those who are set out. And that timing that I mentioned earlier, is so crucial, because if you think of moving your own house in 3 days compared to 30, it's such a difference. And so I think all of these things that have been put in place across the community and down at the court have really had an impact, but it's how do we continue that and how do we build on that?
And just to echo some of those comments, because I couldn't agree more, brief anecdote. I was catching up with some former colleagues of mine, Magistrate Kate Graham and Judge Teresa Liston. I still call her judge, she's no longer a judge. But she's still working in various capacities at other jurisdictions all around the state, much smaller places. And we were catching up, and I was talking about actually a case I had pending that one of the legal aid attorneys had been the attorney for the tenant on, and we were just sort of sharing stories. And her comment was, what a blessing to have such an active legal aid society, because she goes around to other places, and it's just extraordinarily rare to encounter a legal aid attorney on behalf of a tenant, and what a difference it makes. And I can definitely affirm from the court's perspective, it's radically changed the nature of the daily docket to have so many of those folks available every single day to leap in on a case. I'm looking at Joe Shue back there. It's a big deal.
Thank you. I really want to follow up on a few things you all said. So one of them is the importance of an attorney. So Jean, you just talked a little bit about that, but I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about the process, why an attorney and representation for the tenant is so important, and also what a set out means. Tell us a little bit about how this all works.
So in first question, as far as the importance of having an attorney available for a tenant side, I don't think it's any controversial statement to make that there's a power imbalance, right, where a tenant unfortunately finds themselves summoned into evictions court. It's just so common, right, to hear a tenant say, oh, I've never been through this before, I don't know what's going on. Sometime as the magistrate from the bench, I mean, there's just a visceral sort of thing that you pick up on where people are just so overwhelmed that it's clear that it's just not even kind of sinking in what is sort of even happening to them. So, to have an advocate who knows the law and knows how the court system works, it's a very complicated place for good or ill. It just really can't be overstated to have them come in. And what does a set out look like? Well, to echo Councilwoman's comment, I couldn't agree more. I'm very proud to say that, not to minimize that the number of the filings is a concern historically wise. It winnows down statistically in terms of how many of those cases actually result in what we call a supervised set out, which is the court's staff making arrangements. When there's a judgment been granted, they coordinate with the landlord to come out, and it's Charles Dickens. I mean, it's somebody's items being put out on the sidewalk, and it's up to them to figure out what happens next. So, I mean, it's a very tough impact on any person's life.
And I think in terms of the power imbalance, it's important to know that almost all landlords have an attorney. And so there is an attorney on the other side who knows the law, who has filed the case. And so for a tenant not to have representation, they likely do not know what the landlord-tenant laws are in Ohio. And so to have an attorney who knows what the laws are, who can advise them, who can argue and negotiate on their behalf, just statistically much more likely to get either the eviction dismissed or to get a workout agreement that ends up with less money and a longer time to move.
And this is also just a conversation around just equity in general. Housing insecurity disproportionately impacts people of color. It impacts older residents. It impacts disabled residents differently in our community. And so because we know that, we need to be intentional about addressing those things, calling them out as they are, but being intentional about addressing them. This is one way, making sure that folks who income qualify have the ability to have access to an attorney in court. Because we know that when counsel is present, there is that chance of that person being evicted right then and there goes down tremendously. And even if it results in a continuance, that's just extra time. That is extra time for that tenant. It is extra time for whoever is involved in that case to come to a solution that is best for that family.
Yeah, and I want to get to the social services aspect that you mentioned as well. But first, tell me a little bit about, other reasons that people might get evicted that might not be their fault. Does that happen too?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's all sorts of different reasons, as Magistrate Edwards started the conversation with, all of the different things that you can imagine. People end up down in eviction court. It could be that they paid their rent, but the landlord didn't know that it was there. It could be that, they escrowed their rent, but it wasn't properly done, and so they ended up being evicted. It could be that their rent went up significantly, and they weren't able to keep up with that. It could be because there was we have domestic violence victims who are evicted sometimes because their abuser came over and was loud and was attacking them, and the victim gets evicted. And so I can't think of another clearer example of a situation where someone is a victim and ends up being kicked out of their housing because of the actions of their accusers. So there's a whole host of reasons that are not the tenant's fault that they can end up down there. A lot of tenants may not even have their lease, so they may not know what the terms and conditions are. And so sometimes part of it is just an education piece as well.
And I think we should clarify, and we probably should have did that on the front end, that for the most part, we are talking about being evicted for non-payment of rent. We are not advocating for folks who are actively violating the law, violating the state code that clearly lays out what violates a rental agreement. We are not talking about that. We are specifically talking about those who are unable to pay their rent because they do not have the actual cash in their pocket to be able to do that.
Thank you. So, Councilwoman Favor, you mentioned the social service costs of people losing their homes or just even going through this process if they're not set out. And we know this isn't just a Columbus problem. Evictions are rising across the country, not in every city, but in probably about half of them. But we have the highest rent prices in Ohio in this city. And so that kind of goes back to my affordable housing question. But I want to get at what the impact is on the community. So for people who might not be familiar with this process, have never seen it or been a part of it, how does this impact the wider community of Columbus as evictions climb?
Evictions are not the only cause of homelessness, but they are the leading cause of homelessness in our community. It is below something outside right now? I hate being cold. It is absolutely cold. But my mind has not stopped racing over the last week and a half as our temperatures have dipped to dangerous numbers that we know are really scary for those who are living off of the land. And so when we think about what the greater impact of an eviction problem or housing crisis looks like, it is this right here. And we know that the Community Shelter Board, and thank you for sponsoring today's forum, I believe I heard that. But there was a report that was provided earlier this year that went into great detail. The numbers of folks who are actively living on the land to the best of their ability, the organization to be able to count those individuals, and what their day-to-day struggles look like. This is not just a nuisance in our community that we need to just be dismissive of. These are actual lives that are on the line. And so for folks who are passionate about housing or just care about people in general, this is a people problem. I believe wholeheartedly that housing is a human right. And I think that this is a problem that if anybody could do it and has the capabilities to do it, I believe this community has the ability to lock arms, both public and private, to really bring about some strong solutions to this problem that extend just beyond having renter protections in place or making sure that a strong emergency rental assistance program still continues to be funded, regardless if we're in an active pandemic right now. Regardless if we've got enough shovels in the ground. This is something that we need to be talking about every single day because this problem is going to continue to grow worse as our community, continues to grow.
Great. So I'd love for all of you to kind of give me a little bit of an answer to this because I know it's varied. There's mention of the pandemic, COVID-19, and I know that changed things in eviction court for the better and the worse. It's really intimidating to go to eviction court, but there are so many people right outside the court really ready to help people who are going through this process. And that's in part because of the pandemic. But tell me a little bit about how the COVID pandemic impacted and continues to impact eviction court from each of your perspectives.
I guess I'll go first on behalf of the court. It's hard to even begin to describe how difficult it was as a community and the court system to come together to grapple with the pandemic. I see a lot of colleagues in the room, and we all know what it meant. But I guess what I would say is that actually, a lot of the folks in the room had already been coming together through Mrs. Ginther's Women's Commission prior to the pandemic, which, as it turns out, I think was incredibly fortuitous because we were very well positioned, as difficult as the pandemic was, to deal with it. Because we had already been collaborating, I think, for a year or 2 or 3 prior to the pandemic, and we had already come up with a series of recommendations for things that we wanted to adjust about the docket to try to make it fairer, more efficient, more resources, et cetera. And so we were sort of already in the process of doing a lot of those things, and then the crisis of the pandemic sort of just forced us to have to accelerate and keep working on those things. There's a lot of in the weeds technicalities we get into, but instead of just having one start time to the docket where everybody turns up at once, it's an incredibly busy daily docket. We had to divvy it up in terms of times for people to report to court to satisfy social distancing requirements. Just so many things. We went down to the convention center. That was a harrowing couple of 2 weeks because we didn't land on that as supported by council because that was incredibly expensive. That plan came together, I think, 2 weeks before we reopened the evictions docket on June 1 of 2020. Everybody had to come together, and they did.
And I think that, once again, it's a demonstration of partnership, right? We've talked about what legal aid has done, but we also have to work in partnership with our courts to the best of our ability, and having leaders that are on the bench that recognize the problem as it exists is that much more helpful as we were navigating that period back in 2020. But even before then, as we were thinking about what was already in the works, in 2019, we passed what would become the framework of our emergency rental assistance program. There was dollars that went to Legal Aid Society, there were dollars that went to community mediation services, and there were dollars that went to impact community action that would help navigate and support folks who were going through an eviction process before the pandemic. And so when we were hit in 2020, we were able to stand up fairly quickly a larger program alongside community partners like Impact and Legal Aid in the court system fairly quickly. It had its kinks and bumps along the way, but my hat goes off to the Department of Development because due to the way in which we were able to utilize those resources that trickled down from the federal government, Columbus continued to receive additional dollars to disperse out into our community. It continues to highlight the growing need that still existed, but nevertheless, that did demonstrate that we were committed to doing that. Alongside those dollars getting out the door, I became very intentional about the recognition if I can't control the actual market itself, and if I can't put shovels in the ground, what I can do is work on legislating progressive policies that help to protect those who are more than likely going to be impacted in this way. And so we launched Housing for All, an initiative that truly is a rallying cry for folks that are experiencing housing insecurity in our community. And so we have passed a number of policies that have been helpful in helping to stabilize what is happening in our community, and more specifically, what's happening down at Eviction Court.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a harrowing time, for our clients and our tenants who were at risk of homelessness during a pandemic, and for our staff who we were asking to go down to court during that time to make sure that individuals had representation. But certainly the partnerships and the contributions that were made within the community were hugely impactful. And there were some additional protections for tenants during that time, which, our attorneys were able to help advocate for their behalf on. And there was additional rental assistance. And I agree, Columbus did a great job of utilizing that, resulted in having more, and that really had a big impact on the outcomes for a lot of those tenants going through that process.
Thank you. So I'm curious if we might be heading into another harrowing time as those federal protections have lapsed, but federal funding is also going away. The American Rescue Plan Act dollars are dwindling or gone for rental assistance. What's next when that money's gone?
I think it's tough to say. I think that's what you're seeing from all three of us up here. You know, I can just speak from the court's perspective in terms of the impact of the rental assistance had on the daily evictions docket was just enormous. The number of cases that would result in a settlement because that assistance was available to tenants, it just completely changed the way every docket usually works out, and actually still pretty much to this day, thanks to legal aid, thanks to mediation services, all of the resources that are on offer down at the evictions court. But what comes next is pretty difficult. We were just speaking about that, I think, in our last Women's Commission meeting, and it was a sobering discussion.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So it's CMC's longstanding tradition to take audience questions. So we'll move to questions from our live stream and in-person audience in just a few minutes. So if you have a question, please make your way over to the microphone, which is going to be in the back corner where Doug's waving his hand. Or you can type your question into the chat if you're joining us online. Before we take audience questions, I have one more question for our panelists. So we've talked a lot about, you know, what this means to the community and what's happening going forward. So I'm curious, what can be done to stem this problem, to help prevent evictions, and how can community members help if they can?
So, in response to the last question, if we're what's on the horizon, I hope prayer's on the horizon for everyone in this room, because I don't know. We're getting ready to get into interesting times. And I say that very candidly because there is no clear way for any one city to replace $90 million. There's just not, right? And so without that focus from our federal and state partners, it is very concerning. If I would encourage everyone in your leisure time to go back and watch the latest Housing Committee hearing that we held maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago now. And you will hear an update as to where we stand on passing some additional policies before this year concludes. But you will also hear us grapple in live time with the complexities of replacing legally the sources, the revenue source that we need to continue to keep pace with a strong emergency rental assistance program in our community. And so that is not to say that we are not thinking proactively. We're absolutely thinking proactively. But we're also wrestling with the unknown right now. And so what can be done? We've got to have more hard conversations like this one. We've got to talk about the fact that wages have not kept pace in our community. We have to talk about getting more shovels in the ground. We've got to talk about getting more resources to support affordable housing developers and permanent supportive housing developers. We've got to talk about the pressures that organizations like the Community Shelter Board and other human services providers are struggling with right now. We collectively are asking these agencies to do the work that only the Lord can do with $1.15, right? And turn it into 20. And that's just not possible. And so I think that heart-to-heart conversations like this, heart-to-heart conversations like this are incredibly important for educating the broader community about what this problem is, that it is more than just people standing on the sides of the road. It's more than just some folks funneling in and out of a court system, that this is a larger problem. This is a reflection of who we are, but it is not exactly who we are. I think we are better than this, but it doesn't happen if we don't continue to talk about it.
Yeah, and I mean, there's certainly complex issues. And so whether it's looking at affordable housing, whether it's looking at how we keep housing stock habitable and units on the market, how we collectively continue to fund and support all of the programs that contribute to make this happen so that we don't go backwards towards more set outs. And then also looking, I think, at, things like pay to stay, which has been enacted and now enables tenants to, if they have the money, to offer the money at that time, as well as expansions of the tenant advocacy project or access to counsel. We know in places like New York that have done that they have seen evictions go down dramatically. So I think that there are answers, but it's hard and it is complicated and multifaceted. And so it's going to take everyone's, I think, involvement in that.
Thank you. So I'd love to ask you all more questions about this, but I'm actually going to throw it to Doug Buchanan, who's curating questions from our live stream and our audience in here. So Doug, what's our first question?
Danae, thank you so much, and thank you to today's panelists for, yes, what is a hard conversation and a good one to have. Please, if you have a question for today's panelists, please do join us here at the microphone. If you're watching us online, please type your questions into the chat. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can with our remaining time. Great questions at CMC always have two things in common. They take less than 30 seconds to ask, and what punctuation mark does a question end with? It ends with a question mark. Thank you very much, our repeat guests. I'm going to launch us off with this one. New York City is known for having rent-controlled apartments. How does rent control work, and is it a possibility for Columbus?
No. So, I apologize. We live in Columbus, but we live in the state of Ohio. And I say all the time, like, property rights are right up there with gun rights. And so a few years, I believe now 2 years ago, the State House preempted the city of Columbus and any municipality in the state of Ohio from instituting any type of rent control provision. And so we were just recently having a conversation with some housing stakeholders to talk about what that rising rent has looked like. And for many individuals, we're not just talking about the rent doubling. For some of our low-income residents, that rent tripled. And many of those folks, my colleagues and I and other housing providers in this room, are helping to advocate for on a day-to-day basis. This is the reality of what we're facing with. This isn't just a Columbus problem. It's absolutely not. But can we utilize a tool like rent control, like other larger cities? We cannot at this point in time.
Until recently, Senators Brown and Portman were two huge champions of the Eviction Crisis Act, a federal law that would have come in and helped extend some of the progress we did under the rent assistance program. Unfortunately, we now have two new junior senators who have not had that long track record of housing advocacy and championship. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how we can educate and engage with some of the new elected officials we are welcoming this winter in the housing movement.
Well, I mean, we try to meet with all of our elected representatives just to educate them on the work that we do and the impact of that on our clients and our client experiences. And so I think that many folks are not familiar with the eviction process. They don't understand the destabilizing impact of it. They don't understand the amount that rent has increased. Or the conditions of some of the units locally. And that's true. Columbus is the worst, but it's true, our office represents 36 counties, and we have eviction issues in all of those counties. And so I think from a statewide perspective, there is a case to be made that the impact that those dollars and these programs have had on folks, regardless of political party or location. And so I think it's really just explaining the situation and making sure that we're getting those stories out there.
I think Columbus has been very intentional about bringing people into the fold, recognizing that this isn't just a Columbus problem, this is a regional problem. And so we have worked alongside partners like MORPC to host and participate in convenings that educate our suburban partners on what this crisis is truly about and how it impacts you as well as the larger city, Columbus. For my part, as the chair of the Housing Committee, I've hosted a housing forum for the last 3 years, all with the intent to educate and empower our community about what the complexities are that we are grappling with and how you can be a part of that solution. This year, in addition to that housing forum, we held a convening for our legislators around this region to share with them our successes and failures, to talk about how we could better work in collaboration with each other to address this problem. So this is what we're trying to do locally. I don't have a solution for statewide just yet.
Next question.
Councilmember Fravor, great to see you again. My name is Brian Urbanski with the Aubrey Affordable Housing Foundation, and we provide supportive affordable housing in shared living environments to members of many different vulnerable populations, including seniors, returning citizens from incarceration, and even veterans that are facing housing insecurity. One of the challenges that our residents have is that they cannot get funding from the voucher program, which we would be happy to support because it's a shared living environment. And the question I have for you is, does City Council have any programs in the pipeline that might be able to provide emergency rental assistance to folks in shared living environments so that they can avoid being homeless?
Not at this time. There are still the resources that are available. I would urge folks to go to rentful614.com to be directly connected to those resources that are still available to this day. But we don't have any tangible plan at this point in time that I could say out loud. And once again, that housing hearing that we held about 2 to 3 weeks ago goes into greater detail about some of the policies and plans that we're discussing right now.
Thank you all. Jesse Vogel, watching online, asks, can you comment on the impact of algorithmic price fixing like that used by RealPage and other landlord tech tools on the phenomenon of rising rents?
So, yeah, I mean, so we do know that there are these algorithms that work to figure out what you can place your rent at. And so that these tools allow you to see as other people are increasing their rent, that then your rent goes up as well. And so instead of having to, wait to hear about it from somebody down the street, you have a system that can do it, and it can escalate things very quickly. And so, there have been conversations around some of the larger property management companies, some of the more out-of-state properties, as to how the rent increases are happening and whether or not algorithm tools are playing a part in that. It's a conversation nationally as well as locally, but it is certainly something to watch for, and whether it is playing a role in those very quickly escalating rent prices that we're seeing.
Here's the problem that legislators will continue to grapple with. It is a moving target. And every time you think you have whacked that mole, and addressed one problem, then some, not all, will find a way to get around a policy. And so when you have measures like source of income discrimination, which means that no one in the city of Columbus can discriminate against you for how you receive and pay your rent in our community. Why is that important? Because we know that that is a proxy for all types of discrimination, racial discrimination and things of that nature. And so in order to get around some of those policies, we see other tools like algorithmic tools being utilized to disparage people from being able to obtain that unit. It doesn't mean that we don't continue to try. It doesn't mean that we don't continue to work alongside our housing providers and our landlords who are absolutely committed to being part of the solution. But it is something that will continue to be a challenge for those in these positions.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Elena Biffle. I'm with Master Keys Investments. We are a housing provider here in the city. And I just wanted to say, We don't like being in eviction court either. It's not a place that we like to go. So I would love to have some ideas from you all, if you have any, about what we can do proactively and preemptively to partner with programs like legal aid or other programs so we can have a joint conversation, because there are landlords out there trying to do the right thing for tenants as well, so we don't end up there, because it costs us time, it costs us money as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of folks like you. And so we are always happy to do outreach. We're always happy to do trainings. We're always happy to meet with groups of tenants to explain what their rights and responsibilities are. That's the ideal situation, is that we get to everybody upstream and help at that point so they understand what their obligations are. We attach them with resources at that point. As opposed to getting through the eviction process, which is worse for everyone. And there's other folks as well who do some of that outreach and education. So absolutely happy to work with you and help connect.
And I think the invitation remains open. I have said ad nauseum that we don't have all the answers, right? We are looking for partnership and folks who are willing to think outside of the box and ideate on creative solutions to address a problem that we are all trying to navigate. I think a really great example of this is an idea that we are hopefully going to pass before this year is up, is an idea to address wholesaler regulation, wholesaling in our community. Wholesaling is, you see those signs on the street, buy a house for $500 cash right here today. It's a problem because it's a predatory behavior that impacts our vulnerable residents and our senior residents, people who need cash right now. Right? And if we are in a housing boom, if you will, that is a disparity if somebody is being offered some cash when they probably could get triple of what they could get in that very moment. That idea came from the Columbus Realtors. It came from the Columbus Realtors. And so I think that is what proactive partnership looks like. And you've got folks up here that are willing to do the legwork, to do the research, but that are also willing to be in a stance of humility and say, we don't have all the answers, but we're extending the olive branch for solutions.
I'll just say, lastly, I appreciate your comment. I know evictions court is not pleasant for anybody to go down to. And if the pandemic made any number of things clear, but one of which was that landlords are part of the community too, and there's some wonderful people who are landlords. One idea, I'm looking at my colleague Jessica Klinger here, the holy grail from an ideas perspective to your question, if there could be a way to sustain rental assistance, and that's a giant, if that would be the whole linchpin of the idea, but if you could secure some kind of a funding source for that, I think there's a great idea out there that if you could connect tenants with assistance before there's an eviction filing, that would be win-win for pretty much everybody involved, right? For the tenants, for the landlords, for the court system itself, not that that's what matters, but that's an idea that we've kicked around a lot of folks in this room. There's a lot of challenges to carrying off something like that, but boy, if there's a way to do that, I think that would be the best way to go.
Thank you very much. My name is Ahmed Ibadi. I am a landlord that tries very hard not to go the route of evictions. It's good to see Her Honor Shayla Favors, who actually came out to our neighborhood in so many meetings, and she's actually involved on the grassroots level. But this is the end of the good part of my speech. You guys have all these wonderful people up there. There isn't any landlords or developers, and you're trying to find solutions. You're not going to find solutions without a level conversation. I get these calls from an agency that says, oh, I have this person here, I have 3 months rent, he needs a place to stay. I says, oh, okay, give him the money and send him over. Oh, no, I can't give him the money. I says, okay, if you can't give him the money, how is he going to pay my rent? So the issue is you're trying to give somebody money, but you're not solving the problems, okay? And so far, I have not heard the word substance abuse in this whole conversation. And everybody here knows that substance abuse is a major, major cause of the problem. You want to try to alleviate the symptoms, but you're not resolving the disease. You're in Franklin County. There is a lot of fentanyl. Half these people, to say optimistically, have drug problems. Okay? The other issue people are speaking about New York. For you to rent an apartment in New York, you need 3 months or 4 months deposit. Thank you very much. I got my signal. You all have a nice day.
If I may, I'll say I take your point, sir. One thing I would highlight, though, in response is that I'm really proud to say that the Women's Commission, especially in its 2019 phase, when we all collaborated, we absolutely pulled in landlords from, what is it, the Apartment Association, Jessica, thank you. And the ideas that we submitted to the judges were only the ideas that we could fashion consensus around, meaning the landlords were in favor of them. And just for one example, we've talked about having a record of an eviction, and often that's in some ways the worst impact on someone's life beyond just being evicted by itself. One of the ideas that the landlords were supportive of and that we were fortunate to implement, and it was the first of its kind in the state of Ohio, was an eviction removal process. It's not perfect, but we did pioneer a way under existing law without creating a law that we're not allowed to allow tenants to apply to remove a record of their eviction proceedings from the internet, from the clerk's public records, as well as, and I'll say a thank you to Clerk Lori Tyack, who was brave enough to create a policy of her own, which again I think was the first of its kind, that she said, the public record of an eviction, she would, as a clerk, have a policy of having that record come off of the internet automatically without the tenant having to ask for that after 3 years, which is, I think, a huge benefit to the tenants. So, but again, I take your point, sir, but I do think that there has been a lot of collaboration with landlords over the years.
So point to, I take your point as well. That is why we have been very intentional about not just collaborating and seeking insight from housing providers and developers, but also folks who are advocates, but then people that will tell it straight, like the Bread Organization and others in our community. We meet with them and hear exactly what we're doing more wrong than what we're doing right. And so we're challenged all the time to think creatively to solve our problems. But I'm going to point you to the Housing for All website, because I believe the study that I talked about earlier, the Stout study, will go into greater detail highlighting why standing up a right to counsel for those who are facing an eviction would be a game changer, because that means we can start addressing those root causes of violence and evictions in our community, because more dollars could be funneled to those supportive agencies that are working with those folks every single day.
Everyone, I wish we had some more time, but I'm getting the wrap-up signal from Doug, so we're going to turn it back over to Tony Bell for concluding remarks.
Well, everybody, I hope you found today's forum and conversation wanting a part 2 of this forum. Am I right? All right, super, yeah, give that a round of applause. And I hope today's forum found you fueling your fire to continue to care deeply about this issue, to remain focused, and to focus on what you can do and what we can do together. Because as we heard in this forum, that eviction means you lose your home and likely your neighborhood. And when one of us loses, we all lose. I'd like to say thank you so much to the sponsor of today's forum, the Community Shelter Board. We are also grateful, very, very grateful to the presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, and our live stream and promotional partner, the Columbus Dispatch. Our very special appreciation goes today to today's three speakers: Gene Edwards, Magistrate, Franklin County Municipal Court; Shayla Favor, Columbus City Council Member and Franklin County Prosecutor-Elect; and Kate McGarvey, Executive Director of Legal Aid, Southeast and Central Ohio, who manages 36 of the 88 counties; and of course, our host, Danae King, Underserved Communities Reporter for our sponsor, Columbus Dispatch. Give them a big round of applause. Please make plans to join us right here at the Ellis next Wednesday for the forum titled "Belonging is Redefining the Modern Workplace." Thank you, everyone, for being here today. We certainly could not do this without you, so have a great afternoon.